Hello and welcome back to the Ron Talks Tabletop Podcast. Today I have an interview with someone special about a topic that I'm really interested in. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Rob Conley, and I publish under Bat in the Attic Games, and I've been at it pretty since as Bat in the Attic. I've been at it since 2009, and as far as just writing for the industry, I had a few projects in the 2000s that I worked on. I have a blog, Bat in the Attic blog, that I've been keeping up off and on over the years.
Well, we're going to talk about that and your industry credits and whatnot. We're going to get into that. But first, Rob, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm sure you get a whole lot when you get interviewed. So, when and how did you get into the role-playing game hobby?
I graduated in the mid 80s and started wargaming first. What a lot of people don't remember that the 70s, when I was in elementary school and junior high school, that was a time of wargame boom, and that's where I first started gaming. Was wargaming. My dad had a copy of Africa Core in the attic, but really it was a friend of mine who lived in the neighborhood, but he had a ton and we played him a lot. How I got into role playing was kind of interesting in that it was the summer of Star Wars, 1977, and I was coming home, and I had well, he used to be my best friend in elementary school, but for some reason I can't remember. We had a falling out. We encountered each other while I was walking home one day on the weekend, and he was waving a box saying, "I'm going to play D&D, and you're not." I said, "Whatever," and said, "I bet you don't even know what Dungeons and Dragons is." And I said, "Of course I do." And I huffed off and I didn't know what it was. But lucky for me, I was involved with the Boy Scouts at the time. That fall, several of the older scouts brought their copy of D&D. Now, what they brought was the Holmes Blue Box edition and a D&D monster manual. I didn't see anybody bring the three little brown booklets, but that's how I learned what D&D was.
Around what year was that?
1977.
Okay, all right. You did say Summer of Star Wars. I wanted to get that on the record in case people didn't realize that. Like I didn't realize that you've been gaming for that long.
So I got a hold of the home blue box set, and that friend I war game with, we decided to try it, and we rolled dice to see who would be the first DM, and it was him. And he ran me through the Port Town dungeon. I rolled up a magic user, went down the stairs, saw that first room, went right, went into a room with four skeleton. I thought, yeah, I got magic missile, and I fired a magic missile. Skeleton didn't die, and I realized I was out of spells, and my combat abilities were not that good, and I promptly die. Even though I did pull a rules lawyer in that. Wait a minute, wait, I could parry, right? Let's look that up. But then I realized, the way the Holmes had to parry was that it hosed me as far as running away, and I died. But I was hooked because I was
Yeah.
hooked because I also around that time read Lord of the Rings, and one of the sections I really liked were actually the appendices with all the histories because I was a big history buff. Between the wargaming and playing D&D, I got that all that stuff you could do with pretend histories and stuff. This is a way you could actually put it to use that's fun. So that's how I got started.
Wow. So 1977. That's amazing. You may be the person that I have interacted with, at least online, that
Hmm.
has started gaming the earliest. I've only, I started in 87. I've only met folks that have started gaming like in the 80s or later.
Did you cut your teeth on AD&D 1E or one of the basics or
It was the red box with the, not easily, the other guy, um,
Mesner?
it was that red box. And my first character died too. I played the solo dungeon, Lena the cleric was killed with the magic missile, Bargle, charm person, me. Great times. That was my first experience. So
There is a caveat to all that. D&D didn't become my primary hobby until 1979 because we were 12-year-old, 13-year-olds. And while we played war games, we couldn't make one of our own. Okay. So when we got the home box set, it only went up to third level. So we ran out of stuff to do with that. We went back to wargaming. And it wasn't until the release of the DMG in 1979 that it really became what I did primarily as far as pen and paper games.
and that's something I don't I didn't have a full appreciation for. You didn't get all the content like right away. Was there some anticipation, or did you just not think anything of it? Like,
We had two stores that sold gaming stuff in my rural Northwest PA town. It's not too small. It has about 20,000 people total in the total area. And we had two stores that sell D&D stuff, but the main one was called State Street Model, and I would call them every week. Is the DM guide here first? No, it's not. Yes, the shipment came in. And then finally I called, and I believe it was the summer, and it was in. But it was late in the day, and it was a mile and a half away from my house, even if I rode a bike. So I asked my dad, could you take me to State Street Moto? And he said, well, I got to go and do blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to be out a while. I said, I'm okay with that. Just as long as you stop by State Street Moto, I can get the book I want and I'll just sit with you. So he stopped at State Street Moto. I went in, got the DMG, and I sat there, whatever, the 2 or 3 hours my dad had to do his stuff, and I read it. That night, I called my friend. We can do it. We can run a D&D campaign. It has all the two-hit charts we need. Because the previous fall, we went in on the 15 or the $12. We split the $12 for the player's handbook. And then we rolled dice to see who would get to take home first. And I did. And I looked at it. I was looking for that two-hit chart, and it wasn't in there. I mean, you can make a 16th level character, but we didn't have the to hit chart and we weren't experienced enough to know how to make our own. And I looked at the clock and it was like 7:50 and his deadline for receiving calls was 8 o'clock. So I got on that phone. I said, John, what? This book is useless. What do you mean? It's the player's handbook. No, it doesn't have the two hit chart. No way. Oh, they're calling me. I got to get off the phone. So it was another year of wargaming, but the DMG made it all right.
yeah, I bet it did. So like, what are some of your favorite things about the hobby?
I like to referee more than I like to play. Very early on, I found out that I like to set up situations, campaigns basically, and I like to see what people did it. We had a few DMs who like to railroad, to think that this is the way things ought to go, and there's only one way to approach an adventure, and if you diverge from it, you die or whatever. But no, I was always a DM who was fine with people trashing the setting. And if the players had a good plan to topple the king, it would be a challenge, but they could have at it. And if it worked out, then they got to be king or a powerful merchant or built the tower they were trying to build. That with the world building is really what clicked for me. That's basically what the hobby always compelled me, but a hobby, and that's why I'm known as the sandbox guy.
I wanted to just talk a little bit about your background with, creating content for RPGs, whether it's your blog or your professional work or what have you. Tell me a little bit about some of your, I guess, professional highlights.
I took computer science in college, and I went to work for my parents developing software for metal cutting machines. I always liked computer science and programming, but role playing was always my first love. And one of the things that appealed to me about computer programming, the stuff I could do for my role playing game, namely the word processor. First computer I got is a TSR Model 1, but by the time I got out of college, by the late 80s, I played with word processor, and good Lord, I don't have to handwrite notes. So when I came to my home stuff, I always focused on the word processor. And then when Windows came in and they actually had decent graphics program, I learned how to draw maps on the computer. So all of this set me up in the 2000 when I got on the internet. And one day I was on the internet and this Bob Bledsaw, I know him. Going to be that Bob Bledsaw? So I wrote him a polite email asking him, this Bob Bledsaw of Judges Guild who did the Waterlands and City State, and says, why, yeah. So we got to talk, and I gave him the stories and how I use his stuff and how I greatly enjoyed it and still used it when at the time I sent the email. A year or two later, he said, hey, I got this deal with a company called Necromancer Games. I would like you to join the team and contribute. And so I got on the team. It was basically an email discussion, and the point of the discussion was, how can we publish the Waterlands for third edition D&D? There was a lot of suggestion because it was no longer a case where you could just print a listing of lairs, ruins, and villages and that's your product. They had to do something more professional, I guess. I was one of the guys who came up with a way of doing that. Clark Peterson, the head of Necromancer, saw what I did and said, "Yeah, I can do something with that." And he took it and he came up with the final format that all of us followed. There was about a dozen of us working on it, and each of us contributed part of a map. I worked on the villages for Map 1, City State, Map 2, Barbarian Altanis, and part of Map 12, the Isle of Bless. Did the city, the villages, and the castles. Somebody else did the layers for the map, and Clark handled the big stuff like City State, what they wrote up for City State and stuff. And that was my first published credit. And then shortly after that, one of the guys on the project scored a deal with Goodman Games to redo the three of the Judges Guild modules: Thieves of Madagascar, Citadel of Fire, and Dark Tower for D&D 3.5. I did the rewrite of Thieves of Madagascar. I largely stuck with the original, just fleshed out the NPCs, came up with some motivations why the different factions in the original existed, and of course converted to 3.5, which, gotta say, glad I never have to deal with that, making a 3.5 stock block again. Lucky I found a piece of software that got me 3/4 of the way there. So then after that, it was also that time that I started hearing about complaints about the Waterland box set I worked on for Necromancer Game. It was $70. People were saying, "What's it good for?" During that, a bunch of people, not me, but a bunch of people started calling it Sandbox, what we did with it called the Sandbox Campaign. Now, Sandbox campaigns were since the beginning of the hobby. They just weren't called that until the mid 2000s when we were trying to hype the box set. And we took the name from Sandbox computer games like Civilization, where they set you up and you can pretty much do anything you want with the game. There was no predefined plot or anything. Just gave you a bunch of tools and you can build your civilization or wander the landscape however you want. So I went to Goodman Games and said, I can do what the Wildlands stuff does, but I can do it in a smaller format if I just stick to a letter size map. So I can do 4 of them in this one book, and we can make it 64 pages, and you can sell it for a 64-page book. And he was interested, and we also tied it in with the release of D&D 4E, even though it didn't really have much a way of D&D 4 stats, by playing on the points of light. Because part of the D&D 4E marketing was islands of civilizations and a sea of monster-filled wilderness. So a lot of the settings I created for that played up on that. And then I did Points of Light 2, and then I did a project for Judges Guild, and it's a huge map called City State of the Sea King. And I said, you know what? Because they were going to pay me $1,000 for it. Instead of paying me that, could I have a license to do my Majestic Waterland, which is my take on the Waterlands of High Fantasy? I'm not going to do what Necromancer Game, and I outlined exactly what I needed. I needed the geography. I needed some of the names. But a lot of the stuff would be my own creation. So he agreed to the license, and I created the Majestic Wildlands, which was the first Bat in the Attic game product. And I pretty much focused on Bat in the Attic stuff, like Black Mars, Scourge of the Demon Wolf. And then when their Kickstarter ran into trouble, I tried to help them out, saying, hey, I self-publish. I know how to do this. This way you can get some of the backers their reward while you focus on the stuff that I can't help with, like miniatures and the actual city-state book. I successfully pulled it off, but before I can help him further, Bob Bledsaw II thought to share his opinions on his Facebook page that after reading, I couldn't really do business with him anymore. I don't really hold much trust with people who spout racism and an anti-Semitism. So I parted ways, and now I'm in the process, basically rebuilding my product line with the stuff I do still hold the rights to, starting with the Majestic Fantasy RPG basic rules and then how to make a fantasy sandbox.
That is a great segue for my next question. I was familiar with the fact that you worked on Wonderland's material and that you had your own setting that you had worked on as well. The main thing I wanted to talk about today is how to make a fantasy sandbox, the project that you recently kickstarted. A product will be produced sometime here in 2024. I was so excited about this project that I did a little flip through preview thing posted on my YouTube channel, even with the backer draft copy, because I think it's just such a fantastic book. Just to kind of reiterate, why did you decide to do this project, and like what was your approach to it?
I'm a software developer. Part of my training and part of my style is I'm good at designing systems and how to break things down step by step. So people saying, Rob, I like Black Marsh. I read blog posts, people trying to make their own hex crawl formatted setting as well as lining up all the stuff they need to sandbox campaign. So I decided, okay, out of all the things you got to do to set up a sandbox campaign, let's focus on the world building. Let's approach it step by step. So I came up with a blog post, how to make a fantasy sandbox, like 34 steps I outlined. And then I realized that maybe I should expand on them. So in 2010, I started a series of posts, starting with part one, fleshing out each of those steps. And it took me a while to write them. Mostly because I used the example setting. It's the island of in the blog post I call it Pyal, but I changed the name to the Isle of Paid, pronounces better, easier and better. I realized I had to come up with details that made sense for the blog post, and that took a while. That took a lot of thinking sometime. Okay, how can I best illustrate this step with this setting? So it wasn't until 2 years ago that I finally completed it. I said, time to make a book of it. One of my friends graciously donated his time for editing and commentary. When I had the final draft done, the end of the summer of 2023, that's when I did the Kickstarter.
And I think you've handled it well. If people wanted to game with it, they could certainly do that.
A lot of people who, when they attempt this thing, like say Matt Finch's Tomb of Adventure Design, they tend to focus a lot of random tables and stuff like that. When I was writing my blog post and then came kind to put the final manuscript, I wanted to make my book a companion to that. So whatever your favorite random tables are, use them with my book. My book is me. I try to write my book that me sitting beside you, having a conversation about all the things that you should consider for your fantasy sandbox. And I also try to make it clear that you really don't have to go through all 34 steps. If you want to jump in where start talking about making a city and a town map, go ahead. I mean, wherever you're at in your process, just jump in at that point.
Uh, what are some of the challenges for getting how to make a fantasy sandbox to its final state?
Actually, the challenge was kind of me because I am 50% deaf and I have nerve damage. My deafness is a result of nerve damage. I had scarlet fever. Basically, my communications trunk line got blasted by the scarlet fever. And it also nailed my linguistics area of my brain. So it's not totally bad, but it's enough that when I took foreign languages as my requirement, it takes me 3 to 4 times longer than a normal person does. And it got to the point where the college actually took pity on me and said, okay, we will exempt you from foreign language if you take these alternative courses in linguistics, which I really enjoyed. So for me, the writing process is slow. It's not, I got a way of doing it now, but it's a challenge to get what I say in my head onto paper and to make it so it's properly edited and not spell checked. That's computer now. But that's really the biggest challenge. And then maybe far below that is sometimes my vision outraces my internal random tables to come up with stuff. So I'll come up with this idea of a setting or a region, and I need 75 items, but I really only have 25 or 30. So it takes me a while to get the last few items in there in a way that really I'm happy with.
Not quite the answer that I expected, but really interesting nonetheless. I mean, that's why we do these things. We ask these questions.
I will say that the first rule, have everything you can do done already. Anything that says that's your time, have it done. So in my case, it was the cartography, graphics, not art, but I don't do art, but
Right.
graphics and the draft. Until I got that done, I wasn't going to say boo about my Kickstarter. You can kind of see this what's going to be my next project, Into the Majestic Fantasy Realm. I haven't released a Kickstarter for it because I'm still working on the fourth and final map, and I've been talking about it for 2 years. And people have been asking me, where is it, Rob? But I don't promise deadlines. Now, as far as if it's the logistics of this specific Kickstarter that I'm correct for later, all my Kickstarters have been profitable. I never had any unexpected expenses. I have a nice job, but I can't take gambles like I've seen some of the people. And I was in there in the early 2008 to 2000. I seen the crash and burn and knew some of the details, and I was going to avoid that at all costs. I generally use the Kickstarter to fund the things that I can't afford right away, which is art. So for the next Kickstarter, I'm going to build in a little bit more time for art because I was actually counting for about $5,000 for this Kickstarter, and I came in at 15. So that gave me room for more art, which I did order, but that took time. I really wanted to have the proof copy in my hand by the end of January, but it's going to be the end of February. Next time, I'm going to say, you know what? I may do better than expected. So I'm going to budget that extra month or two in there. And that way, if I do hit what I was originally thought, then I'll pull a Scotty and come in sooner than later.
Well, first of all, I have to say that this Kickstarter is doing very well as far as deliverables are concerned. You did plan really well. I'm sure you've been on the other side. We were talking about experiencing different Kickstarter campaigns have been years or in a couple of different cases, over a decade or so late.
Oh yeah, and I was involved in trying to salvage one.
So yeah, kudos to you for that.
I wish I
Yeah.
could have done more faster, but wasn't in the cards, I guess.
You talked about it before, but can you talk a little bit more about what's next for you
Sure. And
coming
I
down
know
the
this
line?
is an audio podcast, but I'll just show you anyway. So the next product is going to be into the Majestic Fantasy realm, which is going to be 4 maps, 12 inches by 18. Each map will have the terrain, islands, layers, and ruins. They're like one section. And terrain is alphabetical order. Islands are in hex by hex number. Layers and ruins are also by hex number. Then you have settlements like villages, towns. So it's going to expand my Black Marsh. And Black Marsh joins this setting I did for Points of Light called Southland. So that's going to be incorporated. And then north of Black Marsh, I'm going to adapt something I did for the Wilderlands, not professionally, but for Fight On magazine called the Wild North. So I changed the southern third of it to fit with Black Marsh. And then I had to flesh out a whole bunch of area, but this is
Oh, nice.
that's a small version of the map. But each of these quadrants is going to be a separate map on Drive Through RPG, and then there'll be map sheets with town maps, players maps. So you'll get probably 10 sheets of maps, and of course you'll get the graphics for the map. That's going to be the initial. A lot of people like Black Marsh. I had on Drive Through. I'm approaching 20,000 downloads. To everybody who bought a print copy of Black Marsh, I appreciate the business and appreciate you making a gold seller. So that's going to expand on that, and people are told me they get a year or two campaign out of Black Marsh itself. Now with this, they'll get probably an entire from first to name level campaign out of it.
That's great. I'm definitely going to have to look into that because, ever since last year or so, I rediscovered my love for old school gaming. Well, I really started to appreciate it, as I got older, I started with the red box and played first edition a little bit. But I really, really cut my teeth on second edition, which, is not quite the same, right? I followed D&D second, third, 3.5 fourth edition. Then I went to Pathfinder, and then like 13th Age. Came back to fifth edition. Played a whole bunch of other RPGs, and then I was like, I did not value just how amazing having fewer rulings, not rules mentality, and all that kind of stuff, and just all the other things that come with that. But it was just last year where I really got back into that. I'm on the Shadow Dark. I think that's where I'm parking with that. I'm certainly interested in your stuff, and I wanted to look into that in the future when it comes out. This question is not on my list, but I have to ask it because it came to mind. Tell me about your love for Harn.
Oh, you mean that?
Yeah.
For a listener, there's a Harn book
Yes.
sitting on
Yeah.
a bookshelf on the back of me. So, N. Robin Cosby was a genius in that. How do I phrase it? So, if you look at history books and try to use them in gaming, There's a lot of stuff you have to sift through to get those nuggets of gaming stuff you can use at the table. And NRC, Robin Cosby, he was a genius at taking medieval stuff and translate and just looking at what you need for gaming in a medieval setting and presenting that in a way that you could use with any system, whether it's AD&D 1E at the time or Fantasy Hero, and then GURPS. That's all systems I played in the 80s. Especially as Harn as a product line developed, they started also focusing on the characters, explaining about the characters, their motivation, a little of their backstory. Harn was always presented things tersely. They never dwelled on anything particular area. Even though if you look back, you see all those binders full of stuff. But if you look at any one thing, it's pretty tersely written and to get to the point right away. And all of that was useful for my campaigns, even though I only ran Harn a couple times. So as far as I'm concerned, these are my source books. If I'm in a stretch of a castle, I just reach behind me, pulled out Meldurin. Okay, it's on the coastline. They got 3 or 4 castles for Meldurin on the coastline. That one, oh, that one looks interesting. Then I only have to focus on what I need to focus on for that campaign and not have to flesh out everything else. And also, it serves as a good like a learning tool for how to write up my stuff.
Have heard of Harn. I've always known about Harn, having read Dragon magazines from back in the '80s and everything like that. So, but I know that this was a setting that you were passionate about. But I didn't realize that the information was presented in that way. Some pretty amazing stuff. I mean, that's it.
I will
That's
admit
it.
it is pricey. It is price
Yeah,
premium, but the thing is, they've been able to keep it going since 1983. So if that's the price it took to keep it going, I would. And it's not like if you try to buy into it now, yeah, it's a couple $100 to buy everything. But for me, I just bought stuff piecemeal over the years. And in that Hardworld book back there's a lot of good stuff in that.
that Harnwell book, is that like a more recent edition of the book?
Yeah. So one thing about Harn is that you might see that little orange spine right here. Those are the
Uh-huh.
original releases of Harn. Unlike what most companies does, this still has everything that does.
Uh-huh.
Plus, they did a good job of picking added details that they come up later, made sure that this was in their book. An entry in there that might have been 1 or 2 sentences is now a
Uh-huh.
paragraph because they realized they didn't explain, especially characterization.
Uh-huh.
Because often in the original they'll say this is a king and this is his name and this is his dynasty and this is how old he is and pretty much leave it at that. Now they actually give you a few sentences giving out his personality.
Yeah, when you do that over and over and over again, it tends to turn up into what? Is it a 400-page book?
Well, it's a lot of pages, but like I said, each individual entry is still tersely entered. So basically, it's comprised of 80 pages on Harn itself. This is like a setting overview. This part
Uh-huh.
I'm showing you is this 80 pages. What you would typically buy from most publishers of a setting. Most publishers would sell you this and a map, but they also have like those mini encyclopedias. And a lot of the entries are the same as the original, but they realized there were details on other places and other settings. And this one's the bulk of the book. And it's alphabetical order. No entry is more than two paragraphs. Then last, they give you context with the overall world. They give you a 24-page, 32-page overview of the continent that is on and a 10-page overview of the world. So it is 200 pages, but it's not like you have to read through it start using it right away. Once you read the first part of it, then you say, you know what, I want to run a campaign in Caldor, and then you can start looking up all the Caldor entries in the Harndex part. And that's the real trick of using it.
I actually might pick that one up. Man, I'm glad you have held on to stuff since the '80s. I've let go of stuff that I've had and I've regretted. I'm lucky that I've gotten some hold of some stuff from like hand-me-downs and garage sales and whatnot.
The reason I have so much stuff is because I never had a purge event. I did
Oh,
have a
yeah.
purge event in my war games. That was voluntarily. Well, let's just say the hex counters were all jumbled, and by the time I was 45, I realized I'm never going to sort these. I'm going to be dead, and these things will still be unsorted. They just got to go. And I kept 6 of my favorite and of course Starfleet battles. But
Yeah.
the rest, I pitched. I figured if I really want it, I'll just wait for the reprint and buy it.
Understand the whole thing about like hobby games and not being able to play them, in the rest of your lifetime. My board game collection is coming to mind, and even though I've kept a pretty tight collection for someone who considers himself a board game hobbyist, but still I'm looking at them like my role playing game shelf. It's back there. That's not everything I have. So yeah, there's some wisdom in that. So my last question I like to ask my guests that come onto my podcast, Rob, what is something interesting about you that other people may not know about?
So 2000 2005, I was involved in the mod community for a game that was free. It wasn't published. A guy in England made it. It's called Orbiter Space Simulator. It's not a space game. It's a simulator like Microsoft Flight Simulator, but for space. And it was very realistic, had a very high quality physics model. And I wrote 95% complete simulation of the Mercury space cap to the point where you can sit with the original NASA documentation and follow all the procedures and they would work. The only thing I wasn't emulate because the technology on the internet wasn't up to the snuff at the time was voice, radio. I mean,
Wow.
today I could do it with voice over internet and I could keep track of the craft location on the surface of the earth and then cut the radio at the right times when you're not line of sight of the receivers. But back then, I didn't have that. But everything else, electric, your life support system, your maneuvering system, well, your orientation system, Mercury couldn't, the capsule couldn't dock with anything. And I was working on Gemini before I got involved with RPG publishing. I only got part of that done before, I only have so many hobby time, so much hobby time. So the writing stuff up for, and I really enjoy sharing my stuff for other people to use. And I want to share in a way that's useful for them. So that takes work. So that consumed my hobby time. And then the other thing was prior to doing that, I was involved in live action role playing, both running event and playing. When it comes to role playing, playing characters, role playing character, LARP, I'm much more of a LARP player than I am a tabletop player because I really enjoy doing the funny voices and getting into the character.
Once again, Rob, thank you for being on my podcast. I wanted to give you an opportunity to give me any last plugs or any last comments for the folks that are listening.
Well, you can catch me on Random Pardon Generator, my blog, Bat in the Attic blog. I don't post as much as I used to, but there's still a lot of good stuff on there. And when you get on my blog, make sure you look up the tab that says Stuff in the Attic. I have over 3 dozen files. They're not paywalled or anything like that. Just download them, enjoy them, and use them. Some of them are full-blown supplements. Some of them are just bits and bobs of stuff I talked about on my post. Also, check out my friend Tim of Gothridge Manor. He has a Patreon, does a lot of good stuff with NPC cards and adventures and maps that fit on a card. And he's really good. He draws them himself.
One thing I had to say about your blog, one thing that I appreciate is that every year you around January 1st, you do a blog post about drive-through RPG number sales. And I
Oh,
always
yeah.
find that, yeah, I find that information fascinating just to see what the sales volume looks like. And then I think you do some pontification about why the numbers might trend a certain way. But I'm an engineer, so that kind of stuff fascinates me.
Yeah, that'll be nice to have a conversation about that. Yeah, but the reason I'm able to do that because a lot of people, a lot of you out there like Black Marsh, and there are at least 3 or 4 people downloading it for free from Drive Through RPG every day, and that doesn't sound okay. It's free. They just download it, but think about it. You still have to go click on it, check out, even though you're not paying any money, they still have to go through those steps to get it. So that just impresses me. Wish I knew they were coming from, but just for my own intellectual curiosity.
Once again, thank you folks for listening to my podcast. And until next time, see you later.
Bye.